Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters. Tonight we are discussing sexual intimacy in marriage, which is a pretty hot topic and one that we've struggled for years to get someone to talk about. So tonight we have Ben and Alyssa with us, and they have willingly offered to talk about sexuality in marriage, and so we're really thankful to them for that. And we're really looking forward to their great advice for tonight. So thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.
So we're going to do a reading, and this reading comes from Proverbs chapter 5. We're going to start at verse 15 through to 20. And Solomon is basically writing in code here, but Ben and Alyssa might like to tell us what it all means. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be for yourself alone, and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? So with that introduction, we'll welcome Ben and Alyssa. Thanks for being here with us tonight, and thanks for taking on this really important topic, but a difficult one that really we don't always talk about.
We'd like to invite you to tell us about dealing with baggage from the past, because I think this, as you have in our previous discussion alluded to, this is something that really we take with us into a marriage.
Yeah, we felt like it was quite important to just acknowledge, because we're going to be talking about God's principles, which are an ideal. It's just a nice thing to acknowledge that people don't come into a sexual relationship with a clean slate. So they might be bringing sexual abuse from the past, memories from past relationships. They might have anxiety around being close to another person, even if they've never been intimate with anyone else before. Maybe, I think sometimes in Christadelphian families, we can talk a lot about don't have sex before you get married. Don't have sex before you get married. And in the eyes of a child or a teenager, sex can become a bad thing. And then you're in a marriage and you feel guilty because all of a sudden you're finally doing what you've been told your whole life not to do. So there can be issues that you carry around that. And maybe just if I can speak to that quickly, we feel like it's really important to discuss with your children when you're talking to them about sexual intimacy, using phrases like intimacy is a gift that God has given us, but He's set that gift in such a way that we get to unravel or unwrap it at the right time. And so portraying a really positive slant on it rather than the like you can't do it kind of thing.
Yes.
So people can bring that kind of baggage into a marriage too. Maybe your husband or your wife has had issues with pornography in the past, so they're coming in with unhealthy expectations around what intimacy might look like. Or maybe you've read a lot of romance novels or watched a lot of movies with sexual content in them, and all of those can set you up for a certain expectation that is doesn't actually fit with God's ideal,
or doesn't fit with your future spouse's idea of what things might look like as well.
That's right.
Things may not necessarily not fit with God's ideal, but they can be something. One of the marriage partners can have a different idea of what it might look like to somebody else.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I interrupted your flow there.
No, that's good, Sharon. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I don't know that I really have a lot more to say other than to just acknowledge that that does happen. And you may need outside help to deal with some of that stuff, because that can be a real heavy burden to carry.
Yeah.
Some of those
Just on
issues.
that subject, would that be something you would really recommend prior to marriage? Is that a couple actually really get some good mentoring help, well, around the whole idea of marriage as a package, obviously, but particularly around this subject?
Before is good, but I would definitely say afterwards as well, because once you're in an active sexual relationship,
Yep.
the dynamic changes. And when you're in a committed marriage relationship that, you know, probably particularly as a Christadelphian person, you feel like you can't get out of, it can add a layer of intensity. So before, absolutely, and afterwards
Okay.
as well.
That's a good point, because we
Yeah,
don't
that-
actually think about that for afterwards, do we?
No, and it's not until afterwards that it's not until afterwards that some of the issues come to the surface, because you can think to yourself, well, this is, especially as a guy, this is an area we're going to do really well, you know,
Yes.
because you're looking forward to it, and you are
I just need to turn my phone off, sorry.
this is an area that you're looking forward to. So as a result of that, you think to yourself, other people might have had problems, but you know, this is an area that we're not going to have problems in.
Yes.
But unfortunately, that's not true. And as your relationship matures, and things surface, and that illusion is shattered, then you can think to yourself, I don't know where to go, you know, and maybe, yeah, actually it's an embarrassing thing to talk about. And I just want to bring that up as well. This is an embarrassing thing to talk about. This is super difficult. I hope I'm not sharing too much when I say that Alyssa and we struggle to talk about this topic. And it may.
You mean between yourselves?
Absolutely.
Yes.
This is not a topic which we discuss even with one another comfortably.
Yeah. Well, we would be the same.
We're the same, yeah.
On the same page on that one.
So the idea, and that's one of the reasons that we even first started talking about maybe this being a Family Matters topic. And at the time, Robert, I wasn't actually volunteering.
It was well over a year ago.
I was just saying this is an important topic that I think can be quite a big one in marriage, and because it's difficult for us, and Alyssa and I communicate really well on many topics. So just with that experience, thinking, where do you go to get some good information? So if someone needed help in this area, I would strongly encourage them to seek out help. Don't just keep it to yourself.
What would you recommend as far as help goes in that way?
Well, that's a very big topic, right?
Yeah.
I know that Alyssa and I sought out professional help from a Christian counselor around many topics early in our marriage. Before we got married and after we got married. And this was just one of those things that had to be covered, because it's just stuck into a wider range of issues. Because as Alyssa said, you bring baggage in to your marriage, and you think to yourself that these things are all in the past. But in this area in particular, they often resurface. So that's what we did. We read books on this topic. I read 2 books. I don't know how many you read.
I think maybe
so
developing a relationship with an older couple in the ecclesia who have gone before you, a trusting relationship with them where you can be open about these subjects is also really helpful.
Just to feel normal.
That's not always easy to get off the ground either, though, is it?
No.
Right,
I think
we don't
lots of
talk about
prayer.
it, so it's difficult.
Yeah. As a marriage celebrant, I mean, we've taken a lot of couples through as pre-marriage classes, and then we usually follow up in a year's time after that. And can I just make an advert here, like for any brothers who are marriage celebrants, make sure you talk to your couples after the wedding and see that everything's all right a year on or 6 months on or whatever, or both or all, and make sure everything's all right. Because I know we've had couples that have come back to us and gone, I'm struggling in this sex area. How can I? It's one example. What can we do about this? And I'll have a quiet discussion with him, and Sharon will have a quiet discussion with her, and yeah, a lot of the times it just needs that little bit of experience to help it out. So, sorry, there you go for brothers who are marriage celebrants.
That's a great suggestion, Robert. Really, that if whoever you're having premarital discussion with is probably the right people to just see if they're willing to give you some mentoring on this post.
Yeah. Another comment I would also say is that this is an area of married life that is continually changing. We go through different seasons. You've got your season of early married life, you've got your season of children, you've got your season of after menopause, you've got your season of older life, and the sexual intimacy side of things changes through all the different seasons, and therefore you're bringing up new potential problems or new potential sticking points, or things that can be need talking through.
And new potential areas of growth, which is cool, which is even better. But
yeah, so it's not going to be we fixed it right early on, because there's going to be changes all the way through our lives.
Yeah, that's very wise. It's very wise.
So what's sex all about? Sexual intimacy in marriage. What is it all about? Is it is it just fun? I know it creates children, but
it's a big topic, isn't it?
Eventually,
we're not gonna be able to cover everything. The couple of important passages that we want to reflect on is this one in Proverbs, which really suggests that having that love for your wife, the wife of your youth, is a celebrated thing. Don't go anywhere else. That God intended for this relationship to be one of mutual benefit and pleasure, and also that it's glue in a marriage. What Solomon is doing is he's saying, don't look out there, because that affects, of course it does, your marriage, but having this connectedness in your marriage is also something that means you don't look out there, right? In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, which is maybe the other important passage to turn up in relation to this topic, and I marked it because I knew I'd turn there. He's saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the Apostle Paul, but because of the temptation to immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not rule over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise the husband does not rule over his own body, but the wife does. Do not refuse one another, except perhaps by agreement for a season, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come together again. And so again, don't burn with lust. That the expression of that, as God has allowed it, is within marriage. But what Paul is saying is so wise, and we just do well to pause and think about it a little bit, is that the very principle of this kind of relationship is selflessness. That is the heart and soul of it, is selflessness. that my body does not belong to me, that in marriage it belongs to my wife, and her body does not belong to her, but in marriage it belongs to me. And so Paul is saying for this type of relationship to be one that is successful, that the heart of that relationship must be a sense of selflessness. I just reflected a little bit on some counseling I did before we got married. And we had many sessions, maybe 8, 9, 10 sessions. But one of the things I remember the most was on this topic. And the brother who gave the sessions said that what he tries to remember is every time he's about to have sexual intimacy with his wife, he thinks, how can I make this nice for her? How can I make this nice for her? And I remember the time thinking, that's smart. But that's just been reinforced so much in this marriage that I think where this topic comes unstuck is not the idea that God intended this to be a pleasurable thing. I think this is marriage glue, really. Yeah, I like to sometimes refer to it as marriage glue. I think science backs it up with oxytocin levels that are released in this act. But what makes the glue come unstuck, right, is when you treat this thing selfishly. Mm. And I think the reason that there's such poor communication on this topic is because we're all so vulnerable here. And if you're not getting what you want out of this type of relationship, you start to internalize that and close off so quickly that you almost don't want to discuss it because you're afraid of beginning that spinning cycle of negativity around it and rejection and feeling like I'm going to be rejected and being closed off or feeling like I'm not going to be heard when I desperately need to be heard. So I think that's the first thing I just want to lay down in terms of a principle in this.
Can I just add to that, Ben?
Say again?
Can I just add to that? And sure. That another aspect of maybe why people don't discuss it is because they feel they might hurt their spouse. If I say, "Oh, I'm not getting enough," or if you did this a different way, it might offend them. They might think, "Oh, I'm not." They might think, "I'm not doing it well enough," or "I'm not good enough." So,
right.
That's another aspect there.
So easy to get offended and to offend. And we're almost rightly cautious to be concerned about whether we're going to offend the other person because it feels like this is an area where we're easily hurt. So communication breaks down quickly. So that is such an important principle that is probably one of the main 2 or 3 things that I would just want to communicate. And that involves all sorts of things in terms of this selflessness. It means that it's incumbent upon a man to understand what makes his wife feel comfortable, what makes her feel loved and cherished, what doesn't make her feel comfortable, what doesn't make her feel loved and cherished. Is she tired? Does she feel like she's connected to you? Does she feel like it's like she is able to go to that space, but it doesn't work just one way. If it was just one way, that would break down pretty quick. And Paul notes that.
Yeah. So I read a book a little while ago, or a few years ago, that was titled "Sex Begins in the Kitchen." You got any thoughts on that? I know this is an out of the blue question.
I've never read the book, but I understand the title.
Yeah, okay.
I think you
I
talk
think,
about
I think it's talking about communication. It starts well before you hit the bedroom. Would you agree with that?
Would you like to speak to that, Robert?
No,
We can definitely
no.
add to it. But you've read the book. Maybe you've got some good tips for us.
No, not really. But yeah, I think what I was sort of getting at is that good sex begins a long time before you actually start. And it starts with communication, it starts with getting to know each other, it starts with warming the atmosphere up, and as you said before, Ben, how can I make this special for her? And so, it doesn't start in that 5 minutes as you walk into the bedroom. It starts early in the day with the anticipation and the communication in particular. That loving communication is what really gets it going. Anyway, so really, probably the question was, I should have said, what part does communication play?
Maybe I can just speak to that. Something that I have found really helpful to understand as a wife is that I feel loved when I can communicate openly and share my emotions with Ben and have those genuinely be heard and listened to. But as a man, he actually feels loved through the act of sex. And the best way for me to understand that is that if Ben never had a conversation with me where he was willing to listen to me and understand my emotions, I'd feel really empty. So I also need to understand that if he never got sexual intimacy, he'd feel really empty. But that we just receive love in different ways. So one of the outcomes of that in relation to communication that we once heard someone talk about that was really helpful both for me as a wife to hear, and I think also helpful for Ben to hear. I mean, I know it was helpful for him to hear because he does this. So as a wife, you've got a lot of things going on in your head all the time. You're thinking about a lot of different aspects of life. And when you come to the act of intimacy, all those things can still be on your mind. And so one of the most helpful things Ben can do if he wants to share intimacy with me and have me be present is to say to me, how was your day? Share with me what's on your mind. And once I've unloaded and I know he's heard, and I know he's heard because he's actively listening, he's reflecting back to me things I'm saying, he's engaged, I want to be intimate with him because he's heard my heart. And it was really helpful for me to hear that because it gave me permission to be able to share my heart before physically being present and available to him. Yeah.
That's such a big thing, isn't it? Is understanding the different ways we can communicate love to each other. And it's often a very different, as you've identified, different for each of the marriage partners as to what that, what way they do receive.
And of course, we're talking in generals, like I'm sure there are couples that are an exception to this rule. I kind of want to put that out there in case someone's listening and going, that's not us. But I think these are kind of general principles of how men and women operate.
It's interesting to hear Alyssa reflect on that. I think God has put inside a man a really strong desire to be with a woman, and most of us reflect the truth of that. Sometimes that feels like a curse because it is such a strong desire. Within marriage, it can be a blessing. Because of that desire that God has put into a man, I am much more willing to serve my wife than I otherwise would be because I'm just a selfish person like we all are. I'm much more willing to look around the house and think, what little jobs can I do? Because if I don't do them, Alyssa's going to feel like she needs to do them, and that's just going to make her evening that much more busy. What can I do so that she has less on her mind, in the evenings. What can I do to help around the kitchen, right? And just with dinner and dishes or organizing the children. And again, how can I avail myself to a conversation with her, and let her share her heart. Now, these things are not only motivated by a desire to be with your wife, but that desire is there. And I know that serving her and serving the family and listening to her are all built into creating the conditions whereby we have a good relationship and thus good intimacy. And so the fact that God has put that strong desire within me has drawn me into the marriage and into a closeness of a relationship with her. Now, that's all built on Paul's principle of selflessness, right?
Yes.
I have to recognize I could put in all that effort and still it might not happen, but that's okay, right? And then it becomes habit forming. You just do it because that's just you're just used to doing it. You're just used to serving the family this way, and that's just how you serve. So what could be a curse if used against the will of God is within this context in which God has designed it is a blessing, right? Because of what it means for a man serving his family and serving his wife, in order to facilitate a closeness, which is a blessing in the way that God's designed it.
Yeah, that's lovely. Do you want to talk to us a little about what is okay in a sexual relationship?
Yeah, that's a very sensitive topic about what's okay and not okay. I mean, there's certain things the Bible lays out, such as sodomy, that's not okay, and certainly the idea of forcing any kind of forcing of sexual act or taking advantage of the partner when they are vulnerable in some way, maybe with medications or whatever else. I don't know. I can just imagine where that could go. Those are definitely not okay, right? Those are out. And I think that beyond that, you have to. This is an area where communication is so critical. And I don't know relationship to relationship because I don't have experience very much with those. But I can say that with Alyssa and I, we've had to have some very honest conversations with each other about what we like and what we don't like. And it's been really helpful when you are quite clear about your communication. I like this specific. I don't like this specific. Because it's really hard to guess sometimes. And sometimes you can be in your own thinking about what you're interested in. So it's very important that there's a lot of respect. And I think that kind of communication, open, honest communication, is hard because of the reason you said earlier, Robert. I don't want to upset the other person. I don't want them to get upset. Therefore, you may not be willing to talk about the specifics here. But it is really, really helpful to know what those are.
Can I just add?
Yeah, please.
Just kind of back to the communication thing. Being able to be comfortable in your relationship to use the right terminology for body parts is pretty important for open and clear communication. And maybe just another plug here for parents, teaching your children at an early age to use the right names for body parts is also a really important part of protecting them from harm, because they can communicate using the right terminology about things they're not comfortable with, or people touching them in places that they're not comfortable with. And I think it's the same in our marriage relationship. If you can't use the right words, it's a good idea to get comfortable using them so that you can be very clear and specific about
Yeah.
what you
Yeah.
are not comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, very good on that. Yeah. So are there any other comments you'd like to make around what's okay in a marriage sexual relationship and what's maybe not okay? Any further comments on that?
I think it really depends, and this is really what Ben's already said, it really depends on each individual relationship. Maybe I was going to talk about this later, but we could touch on this now. I think it's okay to set boundaries. Often after you've had a baby, a doctor will say to you, it's good not to have intimacy for 6 weeks to allow your body to heal. Certainly like you were saying earlier, Robert, under the law, there was no intimacy during a woman's menstrual cycle. So it's okay. Again, this requires clear communication, doesn't it? It's okay to set boundaries in your communication with your husband or wife to say, this is what I am willing to do. This is not what I'm not willing to do. And if you particularly, I think, have a history of maybe sexual abuse or prior sexual relationships where things were done you weren't comfortable with, memories can be brought up when you're being intimate, and there may just be ways that you are not comfortable being touched because it brings up old memories from the past. And there needs to be a safe place in your relationship where you can communicate that and say, I'm sorry, I love you, but this doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
I might actually just share because this could be helpful to someone. Quite early on in our relationship, we were taught, when we saw a counsellor, we were taught this game by our counsellor called the stop game, which was basically where, as husband and wife, when you're together, he can kind of touch you in different ways. And the minute you, as a wife, say stop, he has to stop. And again, we've applied this principle in our family. If we're roughhousing with the kids and tickling them, we have this magic word stop, which means as soon as anyone says that word stop, the person playing with them has to stop because you've crossed a boundary that they are not comfortable. Now, obviously, with our children, it's not a sexual boundary, but the same principle applies, in a marriage relationship, having a word where if you're not feeling safe, you can use that word to.
Again, I think that's a great idea to establish fairly early on through communication before you're in a place where you suddenly put this word out there and then your spouse is thinking, oh, feeling all affronted or hurt. But if you've already established this as together, as this is your communication form, then hopefully there's less hurt around it. It's, you're understanding where it's coming from.
Yep.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add as well, and this is maybe this a little bit from my experience, but I think the world makes out that sexual intimacy should be adventurous. And I think that that creates problems. I don't think sexual intimacy needs to be adventurous. Like, you don't need to be doing something different or changing it a lot or changing what you do a lot for it to be something that is really satisfying. When you're doing that, you're trying to add excitement to something. You're trying to. And I think you're starting from this position of selfishness, self-centeredness. And maybe that's a sign that maybe you got frequency wrong. You're doing it too often, or that you're not properly thinking about the other person. That the intimacy, as I think God would have it, it doesn't need those extra things in it to be satisfying or fulfilling. And Again, I'm not trying to speak about what is permissible or what's not permissible. I think as long as there's open, honest communication and respect between both partners, that's fine. But I would say that if the act of itself needs to be going a lot of different directions for it to be interesting, then you be cautious, because you might be going down the wrong path. That in itself, when it's an act of love and closeness, it doesn't need to be different to be special.
In fact, well, from having been married for quite a few years, you find that the act of intimacy actually gets better and better as you get older, because you know each other and you're closer to each other. So, like you say, you don't need all the extras, because God is giving you the extras already in a committed, loving relationship, which is really exciting.
That's necessary.
I actually feel sorry for all these people that have one-night stands, because you're not actually getting practiced great love with the person who's really committed to you.
That's not intimacy.
It's not intimacy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not intimacy.
Intimacy is something I believe that does grow with time spent together, doing life together, and learning to practice it, as you've been saying, that sacrificial type of love, that selfless love, thinking in terms of the other person. Yeah.
I think the world around us teaches us in so many ways that sex is about some erotic high, and it's not. God teaches us that sex is about intimacy, which is why we were so careful about the cover picture you put up, because we didn't actually want to imply any kind of, I guess I'm going to use the word eroticism. What we wanted to imply was this idea of closeness and a really special friendship that is deepened through this act. The purpose of marriage is not about this act. This act deepens the purpose of marriage, which is the intimacy created by oneness.
Yeah.
And yet God also gifts us that eroticism, is it how you say it? That erotic pleasure in that intimacy.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah, it's okay for it to be pleasurable. Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's be clear about that.
Yeah. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about sacrifice and submission?
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to. Yeah.
You would love to. Yes. Yeah.
I find when I'm kind of mulling over or struggling with an issue in my head and putting it to prayer, that often a verse will come to me after a while where I'm like, oh yeah, this is the verse that this behavior needs to hinge around. And so for me, what came to me one day when I was just having some quiet meditation is Ephesians 5 and the principle in Ephesians 5, which is basically that as wives we submit and husbands sacrifice. And so this is the attitude that I personally try to bring into my intimacy with Ben, that I never get to use this as a weapon. I don't get to use it to punish or control or to get what I want. That I acknowledge that this is a need that Ben has, that he feels loved by this act. So there might be times where I feel too tired or I can't be bothered, but actually I will choose to provide for him anyway. And for me, I will often pray about that before I make that decision. And one of the reasons why I think that's important is if I sit down and think about what do I want as a wife, what do I want most of all from my husband? I want to be loved by him. I want to be cherished by him. I want to be protected by him. I want to be the most beautiful thing that he has laid his eyes on. I want to be the only one that he wants to have sexual intimacy with. Well, if I want all those things from him, then I need to be prepared to be the only one he's ever going to be intimate with. Well, if I'm the only one he's ever going to be intimate with, I've got to be available to him.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe just in addition to that, because I think this is really important for wives and young women, that does not mean that I'm responsible to keep him sexually pure. So I want to provide for his need, but I also want to balance that with just mentioning that, I think if women are in a marriage where their husband is looking at pornography, maybe they might be feeling like they're not good enough, or they're not attractive enough, or they're not sexy enough, and that's why he's looking somewhere else. That is not true. You are good enough, you are attractive enough, you are lovable enough, but he is having an issue with lust that is outside of you. So it's not my job to keep being sexually pure. That's between him and God. But it is my job to love him and to provide for a need that he has if I'm going to be his only outlet for sexual expression.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be coupled with God's intention for a man is to love his wife. And Alyssa just mentioned it, but it's so important that it just needs to be resaid from both perspectives, that there is exclusivity is a critical component of a proper sexual intimacy between a husband and a wife, meaning that there's no avenue for sexual expression outside of the one that God has provided, right? That includes sex with self. Certainly that includes looking at and finding stimulation in other things or things on the internet, or certainly other relationships. When there is exclusivity in this act between only a husband and a wife, and the wife knows that creates a positive dynamic in a relationship. It means a huge level of trust between a husband and a wife. It also means that when you are together, your mind isn't a million other places, right? It's only in one place, and it's on her. It also means there's not an inappropriate frequency, meaning that you can, if there's a lot of sex with self or something like that going on, then you haven't built up the tension that when you are together, then that concentrates your attention on that person, because there's been releases in so many other ways. And I think that's quite damaging to a relationship. So when there's exclusivity, and when the frequency is based on what's good for one another rather than what's just good for one partner, it creates the right level of tension in a relationship where there is focus on one another and there's genuine love and care. I know that I'm speaking to an ideal, Robert and Sharon, and I know that people are in very different places of a journey, and Alyssa and I have been in various different places on a journey, and I'm not judging anyone, but exclusivity, and that Alyssa knows it and I acknowledge it to her, is an absolutely critical component of this, and it builds trust. And when that is eroded, trust is eroded, and this is an area where if trust is eroded in this part of your relationship, then it is really damaging, because this is such a vulnerable thing.
Yeah. No, very good point. And so very, very true.
Yeah. So how would you grow that sense of intimacy on a week by week,
Day by day.
day by day?
How do you grow a sense of intimacy? I think we've
Closeness.
covered off several of
Mm.
our best suggestions already, but just to kind of bundle them together, um, you know, uh, I should just say rather than me, I think a man absolutely needs to listen and and love his wife the way she needs to be loved.
Mm.
I'm not saying every woman needs to be loved the same way. I don't have experience with every woman. I do know, I've learned over time the way Alyssa needs to be loved, and and that has a lot to do with my willing service to the family, my willingness to lead the family in a spiritually positive way, and my willingness to hear her and listen to her as she confides in me her feelings and thoughts and things she needs to discuss.
Mm.
Doing those things makes me fall in love with her more anyway. Uh, but not only that, it creates the conditions where she feels close and she feels loved. And on top of that, you are exclusive. So you are very interested in having a good relationship with your wife because there's no other expression for these desires. And so by being exclusive, you think to yourself, I'd better contribute towards the family positively in the ways that Alyssa appreciates, because I know that that creates the conditions of closeness. And that closeness is something that I want, because of this desire that God put into me, but if I'm getting that desire fulfilled other ways, then, I could then act self-centeredly towards the family in ways I otherwise wouldn't. And I think that breaks that down. On top of that, because you don't have inappropriate frequency, and I'm not really commenting on what I think that is. I think every couple can decide that. It creates the right level of tension for intimacy. Whereas you have a frequency which is unrealistic. So I think those the three things create the condition of greater intimacy. I think, and Alyssa can speak to that perspective, but that's combined with my understanding that my wife is seeking to not hold back in this area of our relationship, so that I can have trust that's going to take care of itself, and that if she can, she will, and that this is not going to turn into some sort of thing that she's going to use to get even with me if I've said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing. Like, that requires quite a lot of trust. So my understanding, and that's built over a long time, a lot of experience, that creates intimacy as well, right? Because I have confidence in that, in her and in her selflessness around these areas in our marriage.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd add anything to those 4 points.
I think maybe as a wife, what builds intimacy with your husband is respecting his need, but also just respecting him as a person, thanking him for helping with the dishes and those other chores that he's investing his time in. Just showing respect and honor for him as a person. I think that goes a huge way, and we get so many messages from the world that teach us to do the opposite. But men thrive on respect, even more so than love, I think, is the honor that we have for them as wives.
Yeah, and in fact, I think it says that somewhere. Men must love their wives, and women must respect their husbands.
Yeah, that's Ephesians 5, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a great piece of advice. Well, I know from our marriage, I think that's crucial. Yeah. From our experience. So.
Well, we really are. Our time has marched on, and obviously this is a huge subject, and there's always more to talk about. But I think we'll wrap it up here. Again, really grateful for your insights and sharing, just bringing us back to biblical principles and the whole beautiful principle that intimacy is very much about a big picture, growing together, being of selfless love, giving of ourselves, and considering the other person's needs. And I believe that you brought that out really beautifully, that is the picture that God wants to see in marriages, is that whole giving. And he has given us that gift of sexual intimacy to really be that bond and that glue to hold it all together. So thank you for sharing that. And just again, sort of bringing that topic out, because it can be something that can be a little fraught for many of us. And so thank you. Appreciate that so much.
Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share the video if you thought it was interesting. See you next time, God willing.